Warning, this episode contains content that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Home invasions are a truly horrifying scenario. It's a violation of the place we feel most secure, and someone forcing their way in only makes us realize that safety is a mere illusion. For instance, you've most likely heard the tale of a girl who drifts off to sleep while home alone, comforted by her canine companion licking her hand from the floor. Except in the middle of the night, she gets up and goes to the bathroom to discover her beloved dog dead, and written in its blood on the mirror is a message: humans can lick too. But while this story is just an urban legend, the reality of home invasions can be just as horrific. You are about to hear 5 home invasion stories. Some are real, but some are the product of imagination. The question is, can you tell the difference? When we think of someone breaking into a home, we think of them wanting something, a possession or a body count. But for some, the only objective is to terrorize. On a quiet winter night, a mother of 2 looks at the clock and realizes it is past her children's bedtime. She rounds up the kids and helps them through their normal nightly routine, completely unaware of a man downstairs, a man walking in through the back door, completely uninvited. But he wasn't there to steal, wasn't there for a victim, but what he did do was eerie in its own way. The man spots a cell phone on the kitchen table and opens up the camera app before snapping a picture of himself and leaving just as silently as he came, taking nothing. Silence fills the house, but the mother senses nothing off. That is, until she flips through her phone's pictures the next morning. A man she doesn't recognize stares back at her from the screen, his expression something between a grimace and a grin. The picture time stamped the night before. But what horrifies her is the picture was taken in the room she's currently standing in. A search for the man reveals no trace of him, but the simple snap of a photo leaves her traumatized and has her fearing for the lives of her children, not knowing if the man will return again, even more comfortable with being there than before. When a killer has all the time in the world and he spends it making himself at home in his own victim's house. Despite the chilly air outside, all still feels warm and peaceful inside the house. The father of the home studies downstairs while the rest of his family, his wife, son, and daughter, all sleep soundly in their beds upstairs. He works undisturbed for hours until he hears the sudden sounds of a struggle coming from his son's bedroom. He rushes up the stairs only to be met with an intruder carrying a knife. The father fights for his life, but in the end can't fend off his attacker and succumbs to his wounds on the ground. His son lay dead in the next room over, but the intruder is far from completing his dark deeds. He finds the mother and daughter hiding on the 3rd floor, where he stabs them to death and leaves them to bleed out onto the floor. But still, even after killing the entire family, the intruder has no intention of leaving. In fact, he remains for hours afterwards, calmly eating food from the fridge, browsing the internet on the family's computer, using the bathroom, and even napping on the couch. When he finally leaves, he doesn't take any money from the family, but instead leaves his clothing neatly folded behind and seemingly vanishes into thin air. After a night out, a woman returns to her home where she lives alone. But when she walks in the door, her security system has been disarmed already. Thinking she must have forgotten to arm the house when she left earlier, she shrugs it off and goes to bed just after midnight. But instead of falling asleep, she lays in bed and browses through her social media sites until she begins to hear rustling sounds coming from elsewhere in the house. She opens the door and comes face to face with a woman she doesn't recognize standing in her kitchen eating her food. The woman calls 911, and when police arrive, they find the intruder trying to escape out the back door. But it's what they discover while questioning her that chills the homeowner to this day. The woman, recently evicted from her home, has been hiding out in the crawl space for 2 weeks. She'd been accessing the inside of the house through a small door in the woman's closet, intended for access to her jacuzzi tub's motor, but where the intruder had also found a way in from beneath the house. The security monitor inside the house had a small camera on it, which captured the squatter disarming the alarm to roam freely while the homeowner was out. She had been showering there, using the woman's soap, as well as eating small portions of food from the fridge. A father lives with his wife and their young daughter in a semi-detached home, and several days in a row he sees an unfamiliar woman standing in the shared backyard. She isn't causing any trouble, and assuming she is only a neighbor, he doesn't think much of it. Then, on a snowy night, as he's drifting off to sleep, he hears his daughter quietly crying from her room. When he goes to check on her, the girl complains that she's seen a lady in her closet, but the father dismisses this as impossible, just a childlike fear in the dark. The next day, like clockwork, the daughter begins crying again shortly after her mother puts her to bed. The daughter again tells her father about the woman in her closet, this time wanting to assure his daughter that the woman in the closet is merely her imagination. He opens the closet to find out that he had been the one living a fantasy. He comes face to face with a woman, the same woman who had been standing in his backyard several days in a row. Panicked, he quickly sweeps up his daughter and backs into his room. The man quickly discovered that the woman was not his neighbor. Whoever the woman was, she wasn't apprehended that night, and the event continues to haunt the family. It begins as a routine night. A father and mother put their toddler to sleep in her room. They tuck her in, say their goodnights, and turn on the baby monitor camera before shutting the door and turning in for the night themselves. For a while, all is quiet in the house until the father begins hearing a voice from the baby monitor, but it isn't the voice of his daughter. The sound emanating from the monitor turns his blood cold. A male voice speaking to his daughter by name. Terrified, he rushes to the camera monitor looking for an intruder inside of his daughter's room, but she's fast asleep and she's alone. Yet he hears the voice continue its horrific taunts to his child. Blind with worry for his daughter's safety, he rushes to her room where he continues to hear the man's voice until he reaches for the camera's plug and pulls the cord from the wall, severing its power source. But even in the silence, he feels as though he's being watched. The father remained there, shocked, confused, and feeling hopeless, not knowing if the voice would return, this time with the one behind it. So now it's time. Which of the stories do you think were true, and which were simply tall tales? Let's start with our selfie stalker. A man who enters a woman's home, takes a picture of himself on her phone, and walks out, leaving only a digital footprint behind, but terrorizing the woman all the same. Well, even though this one sounds like it was pulled straight out of a creepypasta forum, it's unfortunately true, and the man has yet to be found to this day. Now, what about the murderer who decided to stick around the house long after he'd killed the family that lived there, using their home as if it were his own? If you guessed it was false, you'd be wrong. This is the unfortunate and very real story of the Miyazawa family murders that occurred in Japan. The killer has yet to be found. So that brings us to our third story, the unwanted guest hiding in the woman's crawl space for weeks and using the house for her own purposes during the homeowner's absence. While there are stories of squatters similar to this one, this particular tale is just that, a tale. But I wouldn't discount the possibility of someone hiding out in your crawl space too quickly. It's been known to happen. On to our next story, involving a woman lurking in a closet and the father who saw the intruder just the day earlier standing in front of his house. Was the woman responsible ever found? Well, you'll have to read it for yourself because it's a tale woven by a user on Reddit's infamous subreddit, No Sleep. Which leaves us with our final story, a bit of a different type of home invasion, about the disembodied voices heard from the baby monitor's receiver, taunting the child. If you thought this eerie story was true, well, you'd be right. Out of all the technology that's able to be hacked, baby monitors are far from an exception. That's all for this first episode. If you'd like to learn more about the stories told in this episode, be sure to see the description below for their sources. But keep the lights off and tune into my last episode of Seriously Strange on the 5 scariest things gamers should be worried about. You can press on screen now or the link below this video. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.